All right, so before or last week, we actually finished up rectangles and rhombuses, and we spent a lot of time practicing our parallelograms. So what we're going to do this week is we're going to learn squares and trapezoids, and we're going to spend some time practicing more of the properties that go along with a rectangle and a rhombus, and add squares into those. So when we talk about a square, we are looking at a shape where we have four congruent sides and four right angles. And when we know this, this is also a parallelogram. So we could say a square is a parallelogram with four congruent sides, so just like a rhombus, and four right angles, which is the property of a rectangle. So just like our rectangle, rhombus, and our parallelogram, all of these are true for all of them. So 1 through 5 are properties of parallelograms, and since a square, a rhombus, and a rectangle are all parallelograms, for all of them we can say opposite sides congruent. We can say opposite sides parallel. We say opposite angles are congruent. And we know the side-by-side angles, consecutive means side-by-side. Angles are supplementary, and supplementary means adds up to 180. And the diagonals bisect each other. So we got a lot of practice in with this last week with our parallelograms. And so then when we go to talk about a square, when we look at what's unique to a square has four right angles. So just like a rectangle, I know all of these sides or all of these angles are 90 degrees. All right. We know we have diagonals congruent. So again, that was true of a rectangle. Now it's also true of a square. All right. And so when we look here, these were my rectangle properties. All right, these, and let me go ahead and add this in then. These were my parallelogram properties. And then when I look at this one here, four congruent sides. So that means that all of the sides are congruent to one another. Diagonals are perpendicular. All right, which means 90 degrees here. And the diagonals bisect the opposite angles. So 8 through 10 were the properties of a rhombus. So one thing you guys should notice is a square just has all of the properties happening. So sometimes in this class we say don't assume too much. With a square, you're allowed to assume everything. And when it says diagonals bisect opposite angles, since these are 90-degree angles, we actually have 45-degree angles all the way around, because if you cut 90 degrees in half, it's 45. 45, 45, and 45. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at some practice here. If the measure of AED, so AED is right here, this angle is 5x plus 5, find the value of x. Well, if this was either a rhombus or a square, remember we get to assume that the diagonals are perpendicular. We are using property 9 here. So since I know that these are 90 degrees all around, I get to say, what do I get when 5x plus 5 equals 90? So 5x equals 85, and when I divide, I get a 17. All right. So let's go ahead and look at example 2. If BAC, So start at the B, go through the A, and get to C. That tells me we're looking at this angle here is a 5x. Find x. Well, for this property, we know two things, or for this problem, we know two things. We know just like a rectangle, squares have 90-degree angles. We know just like a rhombus that they are bisected. So if I cut a 90 in half, what we wrote in here is all of these angles are 45. So half of 90, and so x has to be 9 here. All right. If I go ahead and look at this one, MH is 8. Find AH. So I love this question because to find AH, we have to look close at this triangle here. Oof, sorry, I'm having a hard time tracing that. All right, so if I know this is a square, I'm just going to try to fix this. If I know this is a square here, then what I have is if this is 8, this has to be 8, and they want us to find this whole side. So what I'm looking at here is something we did in Unit 8, where I have a right triangle and I'm being asked to find the missing side. So if I go to find that missing side, I'm going to use the Pythagorean theorem. So the Pythagorean theorem says 8 squared plus 8 squared equals x squared, because remember you have to pick the side opposite the right angle for your longest side, which is going to be the C. This is my A, that's my B, doesn't matter, those can be switched, but the most important part is making sure the side opposite the 90-degree angles is the C. So I would have a 64 plus 64 equals x squared. So x squared equals 128. So x is the square root of 128, which we could get in decimal form if we use our calculator and get a 11.3. So the diagonal there is 11.3. Now, let's look at one more. If MS is 3 and AS is 3. Now, actually, in this problem, they gave you a little extra information because if they already told you this, they didn't actually have to tell you that, because just like a rectangle, the diagonals of a square are all equal. I also know I have another 90-degree angle hanging out right here. So when I look at this, we're going to have another right triangle where they want us to find the hypotenuse again. So I would say 3 squared plus 3 squared equals x squared. So x squared equals, this is a 9 plus a 9, which is 18. So x is the square root of 18. So when I put that into my calculator for square root of 18, I get a 4.2. Yep, I'm just going to leave it as a 4.2. So then here, make sure you're answering the final question. So this says, what is the perimeter of the square? Well, perimeter is what we get when we add up all the sides around the square. So I would actually have a 4.2 plus a 4.2, and I've got 4 sides to add up. And when I add those up, I would get, let's see here, I get a, looks pretty close to a 17, right? If we will write 16.8, since I rounded here, we'll use the rounded one. So my perimeter would be a 16.8, right? So that's it for the video today. We're going to do one more video this week on trapezoids. And so just make sure, check Canvas for the activity to complete. And make sure you take a picture of these and post them to Canvas so I see you filled in your notes.